Hey folks, Steve here with another World in Flames video. I know it's been a while since I last recorded and uploaded a video. You know how it is, right? I'm going to give the same excuse I always give. Life gets crazy. Now, this is kind of a challenge for me a little bit because I've got to come back to the game after like a week of not playing it or more and refresh my memory of where, all the units, where they're at on the board and why I put them there and, everything else. And so, at least at the moment, it's, it's a challenge for me to get back into things. But I know folks are watching and they're looking forward to seeing what happens. So we'll try to get into that again today. We're going to continue our efforts in Case Yellow as Germany. The Italians are still not in, though they may be entering any time now. It's just going to depend on how things are playing out. We need to push now the Allies out of the rest of Belgium. They're just sort of there on the western edge of the country. And the Germans, obviously we're trying to get into Paris, which is still several hexes away. Couple of things from last video. I think in a few cases I forgot to apply some of the surprise benefits to some of my air units. At this point, it is so far back in the past now that I won't really worry about it too much. We ended up losing a German unit, and there's a possibility that had I doubled those factors, we might have gotten a better odds column, and maybe I wouldn't have lost that one German unit. But, I figure it's too late now to fix it. We won't worry about it too much. I could give the Germans like an extra build point as compensation or something, and treat it almost like the optional rule about cadres. But, we'll see when we get to the next production round. I'm not too concerned about it at the moment. But, it's funny when you look at the board and you realize, it's not like you have this huge volume of units to just throw away. With the Germans, pushing and doing everything they can, any loss is a bummer to deal with. So we're going to look at that. In terms of bringing folks up to speed, if you, are wondering what's going on, or you're trying to refresh your memory as a viewer from previous videos, because it's been a week, we had Poland conquered very quickly. We skipped out on Denmark and Norway because when the Commonwealth mined the Norwegian coast, the Norwegians didn't like that, and so now they have a trade deal with the Germans. And if we can get a unit into London at some point, they will align with the Axis. We have conquered the Netherlands. We are going to have conquering the Belgians at the end of this turn. That we're actually mid-turn. So the last few videos were like a whole turn in one video. Here, because of a major offensive action here, things are slowing down, so it's taken multiple videos. But we are basically, we've taken Belgium out of the war. The Allies are holding on to a few hexes, but that's really it. We're going to kick them out, ideally, as the Germans, and try to force our way further into France. The Allies are just hanging tough, right? Their goal right now is to make sure that they're defending their holdings well. The Commonwealth has been distributing units down here to Gibraltar, to Malta, is going to get some more reinforcements in Egypt, just to make sure that they can hold and contest the Mediterranean, not truly understanding or knowing what the Germans are up to, with their eventual plan to push into Spain, which we're going ahistorical there. And then the Russians are in a bit of a pickle, to put it one way, where they decided to have war with the Finns. They claimed the Finnish borderlands. The German player opted to reject those claims to distract the Soviets with a war, and the Soviets said, "Okay, we're gonna have ourselves a war." And their first attack on the Finns went extremely poorly, very, very poorly, in fact. And if the Soviets aren't careful, Leningrad's going to get taken by the Finns. So kind of interesting how it played out there. In hindsight, probably not a smart decision by the Soviets. And in fact, I probably should have put my Soviet focus on Romania for Bessarabia instead of the Finnish borderlands. The Finns are really tough, is really the reason. And there's there's not a whole lot there for the Soviets to be able to do. So that's kind of the rub. That's the situation we're stuck with. Oh, and I think I forgot to flip my Soviet battleship for doing shore bombardment. I think I have to flip it. I'm reasonably confident. So anyway, lots of stuff going on with U.S. entry. Again, the U.S. can only do so much. The neutrality pact for Germany and the Soviets are, it's still going to be in place for a little while, but it will have to be a numbers game as the Germans need to make sure that their eastern flank is secure while they're off fighting in the British Isles eventually. At least that's the plan. So we're going to get things started here with a fair weather turn. So last turn we rolled a 9, and a 9 in the weather zone that we're caring about is rain in the Arctic, which makes it tough for the Soviets to do much more, or even the Finns. And it's fine everywhere else. So the Axis has gotten very lucky with the weather rolls this season, this month turn, March, April, where the clear weather allows them to really get rolling early. So knocking out Netherlands quickly was good. Knocking out Belgium quickly was good. And we still have plenty of time to put the hurting on the French, because it's very likely that next turn, being May, June, we should be able to see some good weather there as well. And basically, for once in WiF, we might be able to knock France out of the war on time. It's just a weird thing in World in Flames that France tends to hang on longer than historically. And there's a lot of reasons for that, I guess. But, I think some of it comes down to what options you're playing and the strength values of the French, and how can you account for the mistakes that the Allies made in this part of the war. Who knows, right? But we will see the fall of France. It's just going to be a matter of when. So we've done the weather roll here. We're mid-turn, so it's already just the time to do the declaration of war. And the question is, do the Italians enter the war or not? And that is going to be the decision that we'll need to make. So I'm going to put a cut here because we've done the intro now, and I need to think through the actions we're going to take in any declarations of war. The Italians declare war, they have to be able to actually do something with it, and obviously the Germans are very likely going to be taking a land action. That's going to be straightforward. But one thing I will say is I maybe use too much ground support air. I don't have a huge amount of air left over for ground assaults against the French. I'm going to have to be careful that I don't lose my air superiority in the fracas there. So, all right. Okay, so I think the Italians are going to hold off for now. Now, there's this whole thing where, I look online and try to analyze when do you bring the Italians in. I'm not going to profess to be the ultimate expert here. I've seen people say the earlier the Italians come in, the better. That could very much be true. I think for my purposes and the things that I want to be able to do, I want to hold off. Some of this has to do with the Mediterranean. So the Commonwealth is spread somewhat thin here. I could pick a sea zone and concentrate on it with the Italian Navy, and with surprise, probably put a nice hurt on them. The problem will be the Allies will respond with the French fleet, which is not impotent by any means, and I really don't want to risk the Italian Navy getting beat up before it can exit the Mediterranean and join us in the siege of Britain. So it's kind of a tough situation, and I kind of want to wait. And part of the reason why I want to wait is next turn the Italians get their Marine unit as reinforcements. I think I'd like to wait for that because I think the Marines may end up proving useful in the activities to come. I'd like to include it in wherever we go and however we act. The other thing is, if we wait a little bit longer, we may be able to get a extra. Let's see, when's it coming in? Not for a little bit yet. Eventually, we're going to get the extra armor unit for the Germans, and you can imagine, getting a Deutsche Afrika Korps down there in Africa would be helpful, because as it stands, because the Commonwealth has the Indian unit reinforcing Egypt now, down here, so there's that unit and then 2 units down here. Egypt is going to be really hard to push for right now anyway, because the Italians just don't have a lot of combat factors. We need to get some help from the Germans, right? We kind of knew that was probably going to be needed, and what we can do is once Italy's in the war, we can rail a German unit to a port and then transport it with Italian transports, because Germany and Italy can cooperate, and I believe they can transfer those units down to North Africa. The Italians can do that for the Germans, and then we will have some stronger units and some greater force in that region to actually apply pressure. So I just want to wait a little bit. If we can knock France out, that will enable us a little bit of leeway with units that we could send that expeditionary force. The other thing is we got to watch out for that sea zone here where we're trying to protect our convoy. So I don't know, maybe I'm being too passive here, but I just want to be careful. The whole point of the grand strategy that we're pursuing is that the Italian Navy is useful, and if we get it beat up in the Mediterranean too much, it won't be of use to us later, and that's sort of the key thing. And it may even be that by the time we take out France and Spain and take Gibraltar, the French fleet will very likely be free France at that point because of the way collapsing Vichy works, which we'll get to eventually. I might have to just be forcing my way through the Western Med to get out of the Med, right? I'm just going to have to, deal with the potential for an interception and fight my way through and get out. That's what it may come down to, and keep the Italian fleet as a threat in being until we can do what its true purpose is going to be, I guess is one way to think about it. I don't know. I'm pursuing kind of a really weird, different strategy than the standard strategy of a 41 Barbarossa. So things are all a little funky now. So with that out of the way, we're going to start looking now at the actual activities. So the Italians, because they're staying neutral, have to take a combined. So they're going to just do their combined thing, which will probably not be very much at all. The Germans obviously taking their land activity, and they're going to be pushing up against the French units and the Commonwealth units up there in Belgium. So since I explained that, I want to make sure I explain that. We'll take a look here at the actual activities. Okay, so I have taken care of the German move. Now, I was thinking about doing ground strikes, and in fact, there's a great opportunity to ground strike right here and try to flip that French armor so that we could do a massed attack there, try to just destroy those two units entirely and break the line and advance into that empty hex. Now, Craig, I think in the last video, commented that the French probably should have put a unit there, and I agree. I should have done that, and I didn't. That slipped my mind, and so now the French player could be paying the price for it. But here's the problem, and this is really this is where things kind of get interesting from an Axis point of view, because we have in some ways limited ability to do everything that we want. Some of my air, specifically my fighters, are way too far behind the line to be useful. I really needed to get those guys moved up, but I couldn't, because basically every air mission I was using for ground striking or ground support, and I needed to have rebase those guys further up. If you look at some of these guys' ranges, just to see, you see there's 3s, 2s. Some of my bombers have longer range, but it's not the bombers that I'm worried about, it's the fighters. And what's really a problem, and why I'm pointing it out as my German mistake, essentially, is I should have maybe put them closer up here. I had some units based there. So there's sort of like this challenge of, there's a traffic jam of units, and I can only, base so many aircraft in hexes anyway. But I took out the Netherlands, and I had used air missions for that. I used air missions to take out Belgium, but I never left myself enough air missions to move my fighters further up from behind the lines. And if I were to go now, here's the thing: my Stuka bomber right here could come over here and try to bomb, or ground support, or whatever. The problem is his escorting fighters. There's like one fighter in range, and it's this not great 3 air-to-air combat factor fighter that could escort it. And that's really it. I could send extra bombers, but as it stands right now, Everything else is one or more hexes too far away to lend support. Now, by comparison, the French have this fighter is in range, this fighter's in range, this fighter's in range. You know, so the reality for me is basically 3 fighters to 1 crappy fighter is probably not going to go well for the Germans. We're going to get something shot down. It's going to be our good bomber or it's going to be our fighter, and the French are probably going to come away pretty clean with that. If I went for the British, you know, similarly, I would have challenges with air cover, and they have 1, 2, 3. Is it just the one? Oh no, they have 2 fighters, and both are better than the 1 German fighter I could put into play. So basically, if I decide to put air in, I'm going to be in trouble. That's the reality. That's the problem I'm facing right now. My guys are too far behind to be useful, and what I could do is I could call for a halt of forward momentum, right? I've moved some units around a little bit to get better combat factors in those front 4 hexes that really matter the most. And then I could use air rebases to move my fighters further up, and that would make a lot of sense. So the question is there any other sort of attacks that make sense to do here that would be worthwhile, knowing how I'm limited everywhere else? I've got plenty of other units here. But the problem will be if I attack, I'm probably going to take losses. That's the problem. I can only get decent odds with a preponderance of air power. That's what I really need, right? If we're talking like Blitzkrieg Doctrine, whatever you want to call it. I mean, the reality is, without the air, it's going to be mighty bloody, and I'm going to potentially lose the armor and the mech that I have at the spearhead of the German advance. So I've created for myself a bit of a problem, and it's purely from not thinking ahead, which is the skill you need in Rolled in Flames. I should have been thinking about at least saving one of my air missions to rebase a fighter further up, and instead I went I went for broke, taking out the minor countries when I still have major powers to fight. So I've got this problem now, and I'm going to need to figure out what I want to do with it. So I didn't risk the bomber for a ground strike because I could have missed, and it would be completely wasted anyway. The question will be, do I bother trying to put anything into a ground support attack? Now, next turn, I'm going to get more fighters and bombers. Not a huge amount, mind you, but I'm going to get some. Is that going to be worthwhile enough? That's the question here, the risk that I have to consider. All war games come down to risk management in a lot of ways. So how much risk do the Germans want to take on to knock out the German armor, or I'm sorry, the French armor? That's the question. So let me just think through this. Okay, so I made one mistake last video, and I'm gonna allow myself to fix it. And I already have on board. It's kind of hard for you to see zoomed out, but so last video and last Axis Impulse, I did 3 ground strikes of my 4 air missions, and then I said I used my 4th air mission to do ground support. That was a mistake, and I'm afraid I might have made that mistake in a few other places in the game. It probably hasn't mattered a whole lot, but now it kind of does. So I want to call out the player aid sheet here for a second. So as we've looked at before, Germany does a land, they get 4 air missions. Well, if you look at, let me grab my forceps so you can direct it better. We look at a land action, right? This chart will tell you everything in the sequence of play that you can do and how much you can do it of. So if we looked at ground strike here for a land action, it says B. Well, that makes you look down here at B. Okay, air mission, land, I can do 4 is Germany. Straightforward, right? But if you looked at something like ground support, there's a checkbox. If you look at escorting aircraft, that's a checkbox. What does that mean? Whoops, sorry, I just smacked the camera. Well, checkbox means unlimited actions allowed. So here's something that I should have known better. I know better. I've played this accurately elsewhere. I'm not sure why I got screwed up here. But basically, when I did the ground support last turn as the Axis, I had 1 air mission left over, And if I had been playing it right and been cognizant of that, I would have moved. I would have used it as a rebase and moved a plane up. A rebase is a mission. It is considered an air mission, but I would have been able to bring up one fighter. And really, that I should have been able to do that. I would have done that if I'd been playing it right. So I've allowed the Germans to go ahead and do that, and they moved up their good fighter. Let's see if we can get on camera. That's 6 air, 6 combat air, right? At the tip of my finger. I moved him up, and now he is in range to support, and now that kind of makes it a little bit more of a question of, do we go ahead and try to do something? Now, I've done my land movement already, so I'll just go ahead and say, like, I'm not going to do ground strikes now that I have air cover. I've already passed ground strike phase. I've moved land units. But I could now try to do some ground support and see if that actually helps any. And so, in terms of the sequence of play, sorry, I'm just trying to get things so you guys can see the important area of the game. The real question is then, I didn't really do any rail movement. I didn't think that was needed necessarily. But land movement I did, no air transport. So it's a question now of, do we do land combat and where do we do it? And we still have, air rebases, or we still have air missions, right? If we didn't do ground strikes, that means we've got 4 air missions. Almost all of those are going to go to other air units to move them to the front, but we can't use them yet because land combat happens before air rebases, right? The sequence of play does matter. So really the question left for us is, where do we attack? What gets escorted where? And, can we do anything here? If we can smack through some of those French units just very quickly, work our way through, we're going to be in a pretty good position. If we can clear those 2 middle hexes here, right there and there, that's going to be really great. And again, anytime you break the French line, it's so important that you break the French line. It's going to have to, it's going to require the French to move units to try to cover the remaining bits of the line. That's why it's so important. If we can break the line and make it so they have to extend their line, it's going to be weaker everywhere, and hopefully France should collapse from there. So let me take a look at what the combats really look like, and then we'll see what happens next. Okay, I realized while I had moved, I had left a bunch of units unmoved, and so what I ended up doing was rearranging the units a little bit. And I'll just assure you that in terms of the actual movement of units, all units that I did move had enough movement points to get where they needed, and I had enough free space to shuffle units around. I guess this is getting into the, some people really don't like to count combat factors and find just that perfect set of odds or whatever. And here as the Germans, I kind of needed to do that. I needed to make sure that I had a certain number of factors and that I'm going to put a certain amount of force into my ground support and everything else. And, the reality of that is just, this is a war game that is originally from the 80s time frame or earlier even potentially, depending on how you want to trace a lineage. And so, yeah, that's a part of it. And I did do that as the Germans. I have had to figure out, okay, if I'm attacking this hex here with the French armor and the Moroccan unit, a pretty strong set of defensive combat factors, what am I going to need to throw in? And I have to put in quite a lot. It's an important hex to take, but it's going to take a lot of force to actually, bust our way through. And so that's going to be the real trick here. So what I've decided to do is I am going to be declaring a combat. And the reality is I can really only afford 1 combat this impulse. And it's going to indeed be here. I could attack other places, but it'd be very bloody, and I want to wait until I've broken the line here at that hex before I cause more damage. At least that's what I'm thinking. It's just very hard to push all the way through, especially knowing that the BEF is still here and they're pretty tough. I've got to get my units sort of recycled. I need to get some air units brought back up to speed here. And not a whole lot of time to do it with. So what we're going to do is we're going to attack this hex. Now I am going to fly ground support, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put these guys off into the Bay of Biscay.
over to the left. You can't see it, it's off screen right now for air. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to fly our good Stuka. I'm going to fly this bomber, and I'm also going to be flying this bomber. So 3 bombers, so that I can get as many tactical factors in as we can. I'm going to send this fighter as the escorting fighter. It's really the only one in range. And now the French are going to have to respond, and I think, just given the present board situation, they do want to stop the Germans if they can, so they're going to send in their own bomber. They only have the one, and they're going to send in their fighters. Now, the thing is, because I, as the French player, know that the Germans have limited ability to send a whole lot of other stuff out to field. What I'm going to do is I'm only going to defend, but I'm going to defend with. Oh yeah, actually, what I'm going to do, we're gonna go for broke and really try to hurt. I think this is the way we're going to do it. All right, so I've set up a pretty complex, maybe not complex, but I've set up quite an air battle here. Now, this is going to be a pretty important air battle because it's using up most of the French air, most of the German air. There's really not going to be a whole lot left for the Germans to use. They're going to be able to bring some stuff forward, but the point is to cause a major issue with the German offensive here. And so here's what that looks like lined up here. So again, we're following the guidance that's in the rule book. So we have fighters, bombers, best bomber in the back for each side, best fighter in the front. Now, as usual, we're going to be figuring out our air-to-air ratings. So basically the idea here is that the French want to send in these bombers in ground support to defend the hex. The Germans are sending their bombers in to attack the hex, and then each are having their escorting fighters, and the fighters are going to go toe-to-toe with one another for the combat. Yeah, this should be interesting. Let me just put a cut here for a second. Okay, I had to double check because I was worried. I was thinking about fatal alliances screwing up my mind. So how we're going to compare these air is that the German air is going to be compared to the French air, right? So 6-4. Now, the extra fighter that the French have here is useful for a couple of reasons. So one is if we had enough extra fighters, what you do is you add 1/10 of their air-to-air rating to the front bomber or front fighter's air-to-air rating to determine your overall air-to-air rating. God, that sounds complicated. It's really not, right? We're just saying the front fighter is 4 for the French, it's 6 for the Germans, and if we had added a few more fighters, we could have, in effect, added an extra 1 to the 4, making it a 5. Now, we don't have enough here to make it so. Maybe if we had put that fighter in via rounding, we could have made it a 5. But we're taking on some risk so that this bomber can actually add more tactical factors to the French defense. So we're gambling a little bit, but we'd rather have this be a really bad attack for the Germans, so we're throwing in what we can. The Germans are thus going to have a +2 column on the air-to-air combat, and the French are going to have a +2. And we're going to conduct this air combat. So here we go. Inactive side rolling first. So the French are going to roll. They're rolling on the -2 column. They're hoping that they can shoot down the fighter or any bombers, really, would be useful. As long as the French can get hits, they can cause this attack to be spoiled. So they are rolling. They rolled a 10. And a 10 is a DC, which is defender clears through any one bomber. Oof. Okay, so the French basically failed to engage the German bombers. And so the Germans are going to get their good Stuka through. So at least that is through the way. So we'll illustrate it like that. It's gotten past the French fighters. The French fighters couldn't find them. Now the Germans are going to roll there on the +2. And they rolled a 16. So +2, 16 is a DX. So the defender player, the French, destroys their own front fighter or bomber. Well, I think they want to get rid of their fighter because they want the bombers to cause the fight to be spoiled. So that's what they're going to do, but they still get, now their backup fighter becomes the front fighter. So there you go for that. Now the question is going to be, do they abort or do they continue on? I think what we're going to find is that both sides are going to continue on. Yeah, okay. So then the decision is, do the Germans wish to abort? I don't think the Germans wish to abort. I think they're doing just fine, actually, and the French could abort, but then they'd lose their opportunity to defend the hex. So I think we're just going to go back to it. So now the French are going to roll again. Again, they're rolling on now the -3 column, which is even worse, honestly. So they'll roll, and I got a 9. Is an AC, so the attacker clears through any one defending bomber. Okay, so they get to pick which German bomber gets through, which I guess doesn't really matter. I guess this one. Now the Germans will roll on the +3. They rolled a 14, which is AA. The attacker aborts defender's front fighter or bomber. So, front fighter or bomber. Well, I think we're gonna abort the bomber. So the French land bomber gets aborted off the board. And so far, I mean, I think the Germans are doing well. They still want to make sure they clear their last bomber through. So they're going to continue on. The French are thinking, man, we're really not doing well here, but if we can get any defensive combat factors in, that can keep it from being a 3-to-1 odds attack, is what I think they're really trying to do. So the French are going to continue on. And they rolled an 18 on the -3 as a DX. So the defender destroys own front fighter or bomber. Oof. Oof. Man, what do you want to do here? Do you get rid of the fighter? We could rebuild the fighter. It only takes 2 turns. And we're getting another fighter. But we gotta hope that our bomber gets cleared through. And that's the problem. Excuse me. Ah, man, I don't know. This is tough. This is tough. I need to look at this here for a second. 16, 32, plus 6, it's 38. Oh, man. I don't know what to do here. That was a good roll. Good roll. DX, man. I think we'll lose the fighter. That's a really good fighter, but we really want to get, I don't know. It's tough to say. Now we're going to roll for the Germans. We still are rolling as if the fighter was here, because technically it's simultaneous. So they're hoping to shoot down that last French bomber. That's the idea. All right, and they rolled 11, and defender clears through any one bomber. Ugh. So they're going to clear through this guy. This guy's destroyed. And then, let's see, all that's going to happen now. Oh, man, that's tough. So the French are going to get their 3 combat factors into defend. So they're going to be defending with now 16 combat factors for 38, which only means they're 2. Man. So and I'm doing all this on camera so you guys kind of see how it really plays out in the decision making that comes into play, right? So if I'm going to be attacking now with the total being 38, and now they're going to be defending at 16, we'll have 2-to-1 odds. There's nothing, even if we got these last two in, would that make any difference? The last two, if they got in, yeah, would not make a difference. 40 to 16. I mean, it still comes out to be 2-to-1 odds, not 3-to-1 odds. So I'm going to abort. The Germans get to pick. They're going to abort this fighter, or this bomber, I should say. And he returns out. The fighter will, RTB and flip. And then this is what gets added to the combat there. The 3 to the French defending combat factors and 6 to the German attacking combat factors. Okay, so let's talk about the attacking combat factors again. So we have 9 and 7, so 16, with another 16 coming there. So that's 32, plus the 6 from our air units is 38. The defending units are a 6 and a 7, so that's 13, and plus the fighter bomber with a 3 tactical factor being added, which is going to make that a 16. So 38 to 16. The best that comes out to be would be 2-to-1 odds. Now there are some things that we can leverage to make this better for us. So provided the defender is in a non-city hex that is clear, and that is the case, and the attacker has the choice of the combat table if they have more armor than the defender. So I very carefully made sure that there's a armor in that hex there and an armor in this hex there. The mech is kind of superfluous, but it has good combat factors, which is why it was brought into the combat. So we have 2 armor versus 1 armor on the French side. Again, just to show, there you go. So it is more armor than the defender, which means we have the attacker's choice of combat. I think we're going to go ahead and pick the Blitzkrieg table because that is the better table for us overall. The least likely that we're going to take losses. We really want to avoid losses, if at all possible, here in this next roll. So then it's a question of modifiers. Now, there aren't any face-down units. We didn't do any ground strikes, but in Blitz combat, more attacking HQ, A, and or armor than the defender. And let's see. Yeah, we get a +1 for that. We're not using any paratroopers, no engineers. HQ support, no, because we're not using that role. Not attacking a factory hex. Blah, 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 blah. So yeah, we're going to get the +1 for the Blitz bonus, but that's it. So this is actually a really rough die roll. It's going to be very nasty. It could be very nasty. So we're on the 1d10 Blitzkrieg table. This is 2-to-1 odds with a +1. And unfortunately, I don't think there's very many, there's almost no results here that I can really conceivably get that will even damage units here on the board. So this has turned out to be bad, mostly as a result of the air combat. Not as good as I was hoping that it would be. So this is one of those situations where, the French are positioned well here, and the Germans just can't do much. So I'm going to have to roll very, very well for this to make a difference with a +1. Well, that's okay. That's not bad. I rolled an 8, so +1 is a 9, which gives us a cross/B result, which is a breakthrough. So first of all, we shatter the units. So let me get to that. I don't think we've done a shatter result on camera, but it's pretty straightforward. put each defending land unit on the production circle. If it could have retreated, these units arrive as reinforcement next turn. Blah, blah, blah. So these guys are shattered, and they are going to go on the reinforcement track. So the French are going to get them back, but it's, you know, it's that loss for the moment that is most significant. We're going to get to advance after combat, but we also have a breakthrough. That's the B part of the result. So we got the cross/B. We didn't lose anything. We are going to have to flip units, but we get the B. So what is that? For all other units, if the result includes a B result, and the defender's hex only costs 1 movement point to enter, which is true. It's a clear hex there. You may advance attacking armor and mech a second hex. You may also advance motorized and cav units a second hex if they start and end the advanced stack with the same armor mech unit. Now the question is, how do we want to do that? The problem is we have hex stacking limits. So if I just said, you know, we do, I don't know, say we leave this guy here, and we advanced here, and advanced, well, actually, what I would probably want to do is, okay, so this is the tough thing, right? It's like, how do you want to proceed? I could, you know, advance and then advance again, like so. That's how we could do it. Now we'd be giving up that resource hex for the moment, but I'm not sure that the French are going to want to put any units up here. They'd probably be in a world of hurt if they did that. But we also have to flip units, and so we'd probably flip these guys. Whoops. Here in Brussels. And then we could unflip them, or, you know, flip them face back up with an HQ. Now, what does that do for us if we extend it out so far, right? Well, now the French line has to go this hex, this hex, this hex. I mean, there's already a unit here. Basically, these guys would have to come back around, and we will have gained a lot of space. Or the French can try to advance up here and really attempt to play an annoying factor and try to knock out units, but I just don't know that they have the ability to really do that well. So just as a fun, you know, we're playing this as a fun demonstration game. Let's go ahead and do it. So we're going to have the units that were in this hex advance, and we're going to have one unit advance further. We don't want it both to advance, because if they both advanced an extra hex, then they'd be easily cut out of supply on the French impulse, and we don't want to do that. So we want to do that. Now the one challenge will be he could be attacked by these guys, right? So it's 9, 13, 22 to 8. Yeah, we'll do it. We'll take the chance, right? We're gonna be bold. Now these guys would flip, because we have to, you know, flip half. Basically, half don't have to flip, but we do have to flip half. And then what we're going to do is, we're going to do rebases. So we're going to have this Stuka rebase up to this hex here. We're going to have this fighter rebase to this hex here. And we're going to have this fighter rebase to this hex here. So now we're moving up our air. So that's 1, 2, 3 that I rebase. I can rebase one more. Kind of want to leave this guy around to do strat bombing defense, but we kind of need the fighter, so I'm gonna go ahead and put him up there. Those are 4 air missions, 4 air rebases, and the final thing we're gonna do before we're done is we're going to flip this HQ to do reorg, and reorg these two units so that they can attack again. And now you can start to see, you know, we're forcing the French hand down here, right? We could even attack that hex, but now we're also making it so that we can get 1, 2, 3 hexes on that unit right there at the tip of the forceps there. Now again, we're leaving that resource unattended in Belgium. If the French want to try to surge forward and try to take it, what they're giving up is defense of Paris, because they need to pull these guys back. They need to try to reform the line a little bit, because now, you know, really, France or Paris isn't that far away. We could have even, if the French don't really react, we could overrun that fighter and destroy it. I mean, there's, you know, this is a pretty rough hit, and Craig was good to point out, you know, it should have probably put a French unit in that hex, and now we're seeing the result of it. That there was a major breakthrough. The French are in retreat. They didn't get destroyed, but they've been, you know, forced backwards. And as I mentioned in an earlier video, that's kind of fine here for the Germans. If they can just keep pushing units back, once they declare Vichy, France goes poof. So that's the important thing here that we're looking at. Okay, well, that's it for the Axis impulse. Really straightforward stuff there. No issues. So what we're going to do is go ahead and let the impulse end. The Allies will pick it up. Still nowhere near the time for rolling to end the turn, and the weather is still pretty nice, all things considered. So there we go. We are into France proper, if by only a little bit, and the French are going to have to figure something out, because they just lost their all-important armor unit to the fray. And as it stands, the Germans have lost a fighter and a infantry unit in Case Yellow. The infantry in Belgium, the fighter in the battle above France. The French have lost one of their fighters, and as we've covered, the other units were discarded. We do have to reset some of our planes. I forgot to send them home, so we'll do the simple thing and just get these guys placed back. And we're good to go. Okay, yeah, that was the end of the impulse. Going to the Allied impulse here in the next part of the video. You know, before I move on to the Allied impulse, I do want to talk quickly about Finland. So the Finns did get to get their reserve militia called out here, which should have been placed before, and it's kind of fine. I put it in Helsinki. There's not really many other places for it to go. And the Finns don't counterattack for a couple of reasons. So one, the Finns, because they're aligned with Germany right now, just in terms of their current predicament, are limited by Germany's activity limits. So, for instance, having used all of my air, or having planned to use all of my air for rebases, I didn't afford the Finns the ability to do ground strikes, and so then I could do a ground support attack on Leningrad, but it wouldn't do much. So we would have 12 factors of Finns attacking the Russians, and they could add 2 more with a tactical bomber, so in effect having 14 combat factors. There's 1 mechanized unit face down in Leningrad, but Leningrad is also a swamp. You can just sort of see the hex color there underneath the counters. That's a swamp. Swamp hexes double the defender's combat strength, so it's a 5 strength mech, double to 10. It is face down, so basically the Finns would have, it would effectively be like 1-to-1 odds with a +1. And at this point, I don't think it's not very advantageous for the Finns right now. So what we're probably going to end up doing is, assuming that the Russians aren't able to do anything more with, that they're not able to do much more there, we're probably going to end up calling a peace at the end of this turn, because the Soviets just can't get any farther along, basically. But we'll see how it goes. Okay, we're going to go into the Allied impulse now, and I just want to point out, so yeah, that reserve should have come in face down over there. Dang it. Sorry for the sneeze, guys. Okay, so like we did before, I'm going to just sort of separate the Soviet-Finnish war a little bit in terms of the sequence of play. That's merely for my convenience. Again, I'll repeat as usual, we're supposed to be doing these things in a particular order, but just for ease, we're going to split it up this way. I think the important thing for the Soviets right now is that they are dealing with some trouble over here, and they need to resolve some of this stuff. So what they're going to do is they're going to get a unit here, and they're going to flip Timoshenko to flip this unit face up. So as it stands, there's not a really great capability for the Soviets to do anything here. They are limited in what they're able to do. Now, I would flip one of these guys, but it costs too much in terms of reorg points for Timoshenko. So at best, the Soviets are just they're gonna get psyched up a little bit here, and they might move. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. Just start moving some units around here a little bit, with the idea that we want to keep putting units in the border. So yeah, not a whole lot that the Soviets can do. So their action's kind of wasted just making sure Leningrad is well defended, and that they can do something up there. But the reality is they probably are going to have to peace out due to that original failed attack at the beginning of March. So yeah, the Soviets do their combined action, and that's all they really bother to do. Not much, unfortunately, not much that they can do. So we'll leave that be for now. So there you go. Really, obviously, the more important piece of the puzzle here is going to be the Western Allies and the overall situation. Now, what do the Western Allies want to do? Well, it's tough to say. I think the British certainly need to get some units moved around. They might do a combined, just so that they have a better capability to do some of the things they would really like to do. I'm kind of looking around at like what's feasible. They almost like I want to do a land with the Commonwealth, because in terms of the Navy, they kind of have everything out that they need. There's no sense in setting out the main Royal Fleet, Royal Navy, because they kind of have coverage everywhere. If the Germans want to come out and play with their Navy, then the Commonwealth will respond and very likely be able to beat them. So they don't need to put them at risk. Everything out here, I mean, there are escorts with our convoys. We have positions in Gibraltar, Malta, and Egypt. We could probably move some of the guys down in Egypt around a little bit. We might even want to pull back the BEF out of Belgium, or maybe they can hold the Hex. It's kind of hard to tell, what's the better move right now. But they do probably want to try to do some strategic bombing. There's no reason not to try it. So we may do that. Yeah, that might be worthwhile. So I think the British are going to do... gosh, it almost doesn't matter what the British do. I mean, they could do a combined. It really wouldn't make a difference for what they're seeking to be able to do. Yeah. Okay. So this is what we'll do. We'll have the Commonwealth do a combined, and we will have the French do a land. Very quickly, and just in terms of what the Commonwealth is going to do, is they're going to have their transports that are in Gibraltar. They are going to return home to... let's see. It doesn't really matter where they go. 1, 2... I guess they have to go into Plymouth. So the transports return back to the Commonwealth, the idea being I'll need them to move other units around as we get an opportunity. Let's see what else. Strategic bombardment would come next, and I think we're going to try. So this strategic bomber can go basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that's out of range of any German fighter cover in actuality. So that's going to be good for them there. There's no interception. Let me do a quick double check. Yeah, so this British long-range bomber from London will fly to Dortmund, and again, there's no fighter cover that can protect it, so this is an easy shot to try. Now, there's only one strategic bombardment factor there, but they do get a +1 for not fighting any interfering anti-air, which are in these rules, and not fighting any other air in the area, right? So we're just outside of interception range of these guys, and the Germans weren't going to fly any cap because they need those fighters for the protection of bombers and whatnot. So this is as good as it gets. Basically, we need to roll a 9 or a 9 or a 10 to actually hit. I'm going to roll the die, and I rolled a 5, so it's a miss. So much for that, and this bomber goes back and is flipped. So yeah, maybe we could have used that unit for tactical bombing, but it was worth a pot shot to hit German production, and we missed. So there you go for that. Okay, well, we're done with that. Now we're going to get into the ground strikes, and the French really don't have much they can ground strike with. The British could try. They certainly could try. It's very unlikely, and it's quite possible that they would be shot down. Very possible, likely that they would be shot down. So I don't think that the Allies are going to do any ground striking. Rail movement, I'm not sure there's a whole lot that could be done here. I do think that just to expedite what's going on here, we may have, let's see. Yeah, this is tough. I'm not sure we'll do any rail movement. This guy's not even able to. This guy could. Okay, yeah, we'll do some rail movement as the French, and we'll just move this guy up into Paris, face down. Just to get him, just so that he's not slowly walking his way up, we'll get him with that rail movement. And then land movement, which for the Commonwealth off camera here, I'm just going to move the Indian unit closer to Alexandria so that there is sort of a front developing there in Egypt. I'll just show you what that looks like there. See, bam, easy peasy. They're all far away from each other still. And then really what's left is we're going to have the French do the rest of their regular moves. So this guy, 1, 2, up to there. And then what we need to do is restructure our line. So really it's going to be all about moving these units to try to cover our bases. Very quickly, I want to talk to the resource situation here. So if we went to save that guy, right? What would we be able to do with it? We would say move these guys up, maybe these guys over, maybe move like that, and move something like that, and pull these guys down or whatever, all to try to save this. But why would we do that, right? Why even bother trying to do that?
I think the problem with doing it is that the units would be attacked by 8, 15, 24, 34, 37, 40 some 40 some attack factors to 9, 4 to 1. They would be crushed very likely. And what does defending that hex there with the resources do for the French? It might draw off a German attack, sure. It's a distraction, certainly. But in order to do that, we're having to cover a line that goes from the north part of the coast down around the excursion point here of the Germans, all the way up into that hex and still back down here. And that is a line that isn't defendable. I mean, I will say the Germans got very, very lucky on their attack that led to this breakout. Very lucky. Looking at the combat charts, it was probably stupid of me to have attacked. It worked out, but it was kind of bad odds, honestly. If the French are wasting their time defending hexes that are untenable, then they're not defending Paris, and we need to defend Paris more than probably anything. The longer we can delay that. So even as a distraction, I don't think it's worthwhile to try to grab that resource hex. What we need to do instead is ooze our French units around and try to form a more coherent double-stacked line than what we would probably end up here with, which is a line that has single units in a couple of places, which will be just asking to be smashed and broken up in the next German impulse. So if folks are watching this and have a strong difference of opinion and thinking that instead the French should try to defend in that resource, let me know your thinking there. I'm going to play it how I'm going to play it in this video, but it'd be interesting to hear what other people think of this. I just don't think it makes sense. It's an untenable position, and we need to get restructuring the line here. So I'm going to go off camera. I'm going to restructure the line, and when we come back, you'll see what I've done to try to defend France. Okay, so here's the line now restructured, and now the French line follows from the Allied line goes from here down, 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 and then straight across. Now, at some point, I'm very likely going to have to pull these units off the Maginot line. It sucks to have to do that. Those fortresses are great, right? It allows me to hold these hexes, but eventually those hexes just start to become irrelevant because we can't really hold them. They're untenable. And those units might be better off filling Paris with men to defend it. So probably after these next, in the next Allied impulse, it's very likely I'll be trying to pull those guys off the Maginot line. That'll make it easier for the Germans to cross over and then attack those units, but I think by then it might not matter as much because it's either they're useless or they become useful somewhere over here. Now, in addition to that, my thinking is going to be to try to attack this mechanized unit that is sticking out a little bit, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4 hexes of units that could actually attack it that are in good order, and they can hit it. Now they can't do they didn't do a ground strike, and they really don't have any air. So if they were to try to attack, what it would be doing is drawing off some of the German air to basically defend them. And it's 8 combat factors, so here is 9. Here's another 9, so 18. Plus 8 is 26, plus 9 is 35. 35 to 8, just out of the gate, is 4 to 1. 4 to 1 odds, and it would be on the assault table. And it would be, I think, a -1 because of the mechanized force being there. Let me double check that. Yeah, so it'd be 4 to 1 -1, which is actually still pretty good. So if the French force this combat, what can the Germans do to respond? Well, they would likely throw in their remaining 5 fighter, or I'm sorry, bomber here, and then it would become 13 combat defending factors. So then we're looking at 35 to 13. That's really just then 2-to-1 odds -1, which is very likely to be a real bad time for the French, right? But if we force them to do it, then they don't have that bomber for the next impulse. But if we roll poorly, right? I just want to show you guys what I'm talking about here, right? Here's the the assault table. So we'd be on 2. If they threw in the bomber, right? The Commonwealth can't send planes. The French are kind of out of planes at the moment now. But if the Germans sent in their bomber, it would be, 2-to-1 odds, -1 due to the mech advantage, and it would be, very likely, unless we rolled very well, best they could do is a 8 or a 9 result, and you'd have to roll well. Everything else involves French losing units, and the French really can't afford to lose units. Actually, I'm sorry. I apologize. It would not be a -1. There would be no -1 because that's only for armor. The mech doesn't matter. That's interesting. That's an interesting difference in the 1d10 table. So, and really, honestly, the factors that kind of flow into this. I mean, it would just be. We could risk it, but is it worth the risk? We would use up their bomber. And that would slow the Germans down a little bit. Yeah, tough to say. This is kind of a tough call. Do the French do a spoiling attack to draw off the bomber support and hope for a very poor roll, hope for a good roll, but at very poor chances to actually do well, or they're going to lose their own units and soften up their line so the Germans just counterattack. They might not even need bomber support at that point because the line's been weakened so much that they can kind of do what they want. I think based on this whole analysis that I'm talking through, the French are not going to attack. And that sucks because they would really like to. In so many ways, it would be great to try, but they just do not. They do not have the ability to sustain these losses. It's very likely they could roll and end up losing 2 guys, and they don't have a lot of places to lose 2 guys. And the Germans still have reserves that are behind back here in some of these hexes. So, it'd be great to knock out a mech, but the risk is just too great. So the French are not going to attack. That's the tough thing. But now we get to reorg. So will the Allies reorg anything? Well, I think, given the circumstances, I moved this HQ out of range. Jeez, oh man. I think what we'll do is we'll have this HQ flip, and we will restore one of these fighters via reorg. So we at least get 1 fighter back. It's not a great fighter, but it's something that we can look to utilize. That's a tough call. That's tough. But we might as well try. And I guess actually we could flip this other HQ and flip this fighter as well. So now the French Air Force is restored to working order via HQ support, and they'll be able to at least contest the Germans as they come in. This is really what's interesting here is that without expansions and optional rules, the HQs are really there to unflip units, basically. They're their own unit, sure, and with other optional rules they can do a lot of other things, but their primary purpose here is to put some oomph into the units that as they are used or flipped in combat or whatever, that you flip the HQ to get them back in working order, but eventually you run out of HQs that haven't been flipped themselves,
and that's when you are really done with your turn. With the expansions, there's a ton of other things you could be doing with offensive points that come through HQs, and you can use offensive points to reset HQs. But without that, here in the classic game, we're just strategically picking how we're using them. Now, just to explain, it costs 2 reorg points to flip an air unit outside of an air action. So because we took a land action as the French, it costs double points to flip a unit, and one could look at this as kind of a waste to flip these guys, but at this point the air is so deadly that I think the French needed to be able to, they need to contest the skies, they have to. The other thing to keep in mind is, and this was brought up in another video, somebody asking what the Commonwealth and the French can cooperate, right? Actually, no, they can't. So according to the cooperation rules, the Commonwealth and the French, the regular French, do not cooperate, which means if Commonwealth units are attacked, only Commonwealth planes can help, and same for France. French units can only support French units. This changes once Vichy France has been declared, and France is separated into occupied France, which is controlled by Germany, the Vichy France, which is neutral-ish, and then Free France, which is the Allied remnants, and the Allied remnants can cooperate with the British because you can sort of see that as like the French operational command kind of doesn't exist really anymore, and they're working with the British directly to survive. That's when they can cooperate. So it's one of those, I don't know, handicap issues or just one of those penalties that the Western Allies have to deal with, that they can't just be a super coordinated force. That just doesn't exist. And that gives the Germans the advantage to kind of pick and choose where they hit and where they attack. So, yeah, there we go. Anyway, that's the Western Allies action over already, relatively quick. There's not as much for them to do here as they're seeking a way to hold back the Germans who've made some great gains. So we're going to shift the Axis Impulse marker one more time, and now the Axis will roll weather, and we'll see what we get. And I rolled another 9! Oh, man. Okay. All right. Well, guess what, guys? The weather doesn't change. The weather doesn't change. The Axis still has beautiful weather. So we'll look into that. I'm going to do a time check and see where we're at with time. I might have to make this just a video because we went through a lot of stuff here. But it'll be the Axis Impulse again. And man, great weather. They're making progress in the great weather. Something to think about. Okay, yeah, guys, this video is getting pretty long already. We're over an hour. So I think what I'll do is I'll call this video here. So we're about to start the 5th impulse of the March and April turn, which would be the 3rd Axis impulse. So far, miraculously, the weather in March-April has been fine pretty much the entire time, all except for the Arctic, which we won't worry too much about. The rain inhibiting the Soviet-Finnish war up there, the Spring War. But yeah, this great weather is going to be a pretty important impact on the timetable that the Axis is working on. So they are now starting to get into France proper. They're going to be able to start pressuring even the British, really, now that they can get a couple hexes on the British Expeditionary Force. The pressure is going to start being felt for sure. Very, very lucky. So if the Germans can actually take France out by the end of the May-June turn, then that could be a very interesting development. We're going to be on a nice moving track. And we could start thinking about Spain a little longer we go here. So we'll call the video here. The next video, whenever I will get to it, which I guess would be part 3 of Case Yellow at this point, getting closer to Case Red, we'll pick up there. So thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate your viewership if you're watching all of these and getting your way through it. I hope these videos are valuable to you. I understand I sometimes get off on tangents as I describe this, and when we slow down the action to really look at important battles like the air battle that we saw earlier, the protracted air battle can have pretty big impacts to the way land combats go and whether an offensive will be successful or not. I think that's a really important thing to analyze and to show new players how that kind of works out. And we'll keep it going. So again, thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Keep on gaming.